So Cancer Progress is quite a unique entity. Perhaps a little bit of anecdotal history here in terms of a relationship with
Hello, everybody, and welcome today to our BioNeex C-level executive interview. My name is Simbad Rafajan. I'm the founder of BioNeex. And short about BioNeex. BioNeex is an online peer-to-peer platform for licensing and collaborative partnerships. We provide infrastructure for biotech companies to list their compounds on our platform. And other side, we provide access to pharmaceutical companies to expand their R&D pipeline by having direct access to these compounds. Today we have a guest, the Executive Vice President, Head of the Oncology of Cello Health Bioconsulting. And Cello Health Bioconsulting is over many years organizing one of the leadership conferences in cancer in the industry. It calls Cancer Progress. We will speak with Jeff today, with our guest, about Cancer Progress. Dear Jeff, please, my first question then will be to you. Can you a little bit tell us more about Cancer Progress and why is the Cancer Progress is unique itself, and what's the difference between ASCO or IASCR conferences?
Thank you, Samba. Thanks for hosting this discussion with me today. So I appreciate it. So Cancer Progress is quite a unique entity. Perhaps a little bit of anecdotal history here in terms of a relationship with it. So we acquired it, I think, about 7 years ago. Before that, I had been attending it for about 10 years, and I was introduced to it by our largest client at the time, which was Aventis Oncology. And it was through the head of strategic marketing there. And at the first conference, I was struck by the uniqueness of the panelists, the makeup of the audience, the high level of both, and also how well it kind of mirrored what essentially we did as a company, which was triangulating scientific, clinical, and commercial issues. And in particular, it was kind of fascinating to be there at that first conference at the first lunch on the first day, sitting between, on the one hand, this client, head of strategic marketing at Aventis, where we were doing very early looks at their early programs and kind of applying a commercial kind of spin or perspective to them, if you will. And on my right was Art Levinson, head of Genentech at the time. Who of course believed that the science should drive everything, which of course the science is the underpinning. And so, it was an interesting dialogue, debate even between the two parties. One that felt, early on you should be thinking of clinical, commercial questions. The other, let the science guide you where it will. And so kind of being right in the middle is where ultimately, defined health is in terms of trying to objectively assess programs for our biopharma clients. So when the founders of Cancer Progress offered it to us to acquire it and take it over, it seemed like the perfect fit for kind of demonstrating what our actual consulting business like in oncology. So then specifically in terms of your question about how does it differ from other meetings, well, certainly it differs from the major conferences in that it is not about data per se, right? So in all those major conferences or any of the smaller satellite ones, a lot of time is spent on presentations of data, going through slides, etc. That's important, of course, but there are plenty of meetings that do that. We early on decided to even reduce the amount of slides compared to what Cancer Progress had done originally and focus much more on collegial panel discussions between industry experts, clinical translational experts, basic scientists, so that it was really a chance for people to hear each of these experts and stakeholders' thoughts about what was going on in terms of the future of cancer management, the challenges in it, the challenges in developing drugs, bringing them forward to patients, etc. I'll stop there.
Yeah, it seems like Cancer Progress is differentiating with this active discussion between panelists, and it's getting more like covering, besides this, as you mentioned, data, also other aspects of that really can touch to the daily business life, the industry. So it's more like active discussion.
Yeah, very active discussion, fairly frank discussion, good interaction from the audience. And again, at the end of the day, the opinions are reflective of the people, hopefully to some degree of the companies. Gets a little harder when they're big entities, but nevertheless, they are pretty frank discussions amongst the various different stakeholders, which is quite interesting. And although, not every panel has equal balance of dealing with scientific, clinical, and commercial issues. Some may veer more towards the science because it may be about a mechanism of action or a new therapeutic modality, but nevertheless, it's always put in the context of how is this novel science or target or therapeutic approach going to address unmet needs, and how can one develop it, and what challenges, what might one face, say, from the market or commercial standpoint, even from the standpoint of, say, market access and reimbursement.
Yes. And can you maybe a little bit tell, like, over the years, how it changed actually, the development? As you mentioned, like very early, it was, I guess, different. Now there is, of course, like connected to the immuno-oncology changes that come in the industry. I would
sure.
Tell a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think certainly for one, you've hit on a key point that just thematically, the number of panels that are addressing immuno-oncology in some way, shape, or form has significantly increased, because it's significantly increased in terms of the interest of the industry. Very early on, we had panels on that. So if we acquired it 7 years ago, we're talking, really about 2012. So just on the cusp of the approval of the checkpoint inhibitors of Yervoy and Opdivo, Keytruda, etc. So even at that point, I think we had some early sessions, maybe on cancer vaccines, on oncolytic viruses, etc. So the topic matter and content has changed to some degree, just by virtue of what kind of therapeutic approaches the industry is interested in. Even though we had early on an interest in kind of pricing and access, it wasn't necessarily front and center. But certainly over the past 5 years, we've had a particular full panel focused on that, led by the founder of Define Health, Nutshell Health Bioconsulting, and now it's Chairman Ed Saltzman, with Peter Bock and other luminaries who are thinking about the challenges going forward of trying to pay and get access for patients to these various agents. So some of the content certainly has changed. And as I said before, some of the actual makeup, I mean, we always wanted to do and always wanted to focus on the panel discussions. But in the early days, there was a bit more of the kind of transition of, having some slides and some data. The problem there is one always wants to make sure that some companies, particularly biotechs, because it's a nice venue for them, don't end up doing a commercial. So as a way to kind of avoid that, we have increasingly been draconian in reducing the number of slides to at most 1 or 2, and in many cases the panels have 0 slides. So that really can be a group discussion.
Yeah. And maybe like as far we are in the topic or general in the conference, you can touch a few silent issues during the conference that you want to bring prior to the conference over the water.
Sure. Well, salient topics, of course. I mean, we have, I believe, 3 overt panels on immuno-oncology. One about the interesting challenge of trying to match the therapeutic modality to the target. So, how do you choose the target, and then how do you think about whether it's best to go after that with a bispecific or an ADC or a T-cell redirecting therapy or an adoptive cell therapy, et cetera. We also have one about just the continued challenge of thinking about doing combinations in IO. And then we have a kind of a more business-oriented one, but nevertheless, that's still taking into consideration what's going on clinically within immuno-oncology, which is really about BD and deal-making within the oncology space. So, so those three are kind of main IO-focused panels. We also are opening up with two, I think, somewhat more different and challenging type of topics. One being one about kind of what has been called chemoprevention, some are calling now immunoprevention, depending on how one approaches it, but the idea of trying to intercede early on, either to prevent cancer or to prevent recurrence of cancer. So that will be an interesting discussion, because that's an area for logistical, price, other reasons that kind of the industry has been less sanguine about going into historically. Anything smacking of prevention, whether primary or secondary kind of prevention. And then we have an interesting panel on metastases, which has been a big bugaboo for the industry. Is how do you what are the best targets, and then also how do you do trials for an agent that might have some effects on metastases, and those two panels are not unrelated in fact. So we're kind of opening up on a little bit of a kind of contrarian perspective, and then we'll get into other sessions, the IO sessions on heme malignancies and the major transformations that have happened across a number of spaces there, like AML. Recently, we'll have an interesting panel talking about gynecologic and breast cancers, again with a mix of clinical experts as well as industry folks, because there are major unmet needs remaining even in some selected breast cancer settings like TNBC, let alone endometrial and other places. So that's a highlight of some of the various types of panels. And I know you'll be speaking with each of the various other moderators from Health Bioconsulting throughout the course of the next few days to dive more deeply into some of those individual panels.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as I went through the agenda, that seems very diverse. Also, the topics that's getting touched during the conference, and I think one of the areas you mentioned would be biotech deal-making process. Maybe like you would like to speak kind of prior to your moderation. What's going to be the discussion mainly there, and the second, like what type of attendees, panelists you are having this year, because as we see the real innovation-driven, innovation drives forward, it's the biotechs, and I guess it will become more and more attractive conference for such a small, mid-sized biotechs with their innovative pipelines to come to attend the cancer program.
Absolutely. Yeah, and actually, I'll make a reference in reverse order to, since you just talked about kind of the type of attendees, and it is a very much of a mix of mostly industry folks, some clinical people, some foundations, a smattering of various types of investors, but probably 85% are industry folks from either biotech or pharma. From the biotech side, it's the kind of the C-suite folks. It may be the CEO or the COO or CMO, CSO type of person. And in large pharma, these are the kind of the senior people leading various components within the industry, whether the BD or strategy or other aspects. So the panel actually on deal making that you referred to, although it is focused predominantly on immuno-oncology, I'm sure we're going to kind of touch more broadly on that, because the title, of course, is Biotech Deal Making, the Face of IO Frenzy or Fatigue, Same Old or Different New. We do like to have fun with our titles as when we can, but and that's got a stellar set of panelists to talk about what kind of trends we've been seeing, and will there continue to be this huge spate, particularly of early stage IO deals, or will we be facing some type of maturing vision where less deals will be done in IO, will be more of a rebalancing with quote unquote non-IO, and this is a false dichotomy, a straw man too, This is, I'm sure, something also that will be brought up in the course of the conference between IO and non-IO, because at the end of the day, probably almost every agent that works significantly in cancer, probably needs to engage at various levels the immune system. But nevertheless, there are things that we can kind of frankly call, yes, they're predominantly working through IO mechanisms, and others that maybe less directly. So that being said, we're bound to end up talking about kind of that balance of deal making and the type of the deals and the size of the deals across both IO and non-IO. But it is quite an impressive group of people. We have Kapil Dhingra, who I think just about everybody will know out of Genentech, Roche, who's now basically a consultant and on many boards, et cetera, and as an oncologist, has a very broad both clinical and industry knowledge. Jane Dancer, the CBO from FSTAR, so a bispecific company. Axel Hoos, who needs no introduction, from GSK. Helen Tatum-Martin, CBO from Adaptimmune. Jing Chang from Dynavax, so Adaptimmune, TCR company. Dynavax, a toll agonist company. And most recently added is Jill O'Donnell-Tormey, CEO and director of CRI, Cancer Research Institute, which has a long-standing history in terms of funding great advances within immuno-oncology. So it's really a great panel session.
Yes, it's very interesting. I guess I will come to my last question, like kind of trying to put two questions together. It's about immuno-oncology together as a combination therapy, as well as like the partnerings over the next 12 months or expectations for the industry. Like, can you a little bit maybe tell more in terms of also partnering as a small biotech can expect partnering their immuno-oncology space with another bigger company, immuno-oncology space?
Every biotech is, of course, hoping to do that in some way. But it starts even more simply beyond the hoping to kind of license or maybe be acquired. It often starts with the idea of, well, can at least we collaborate so we can gain access where appropriate to the checkpoint inhibitors that any of these 6 or 7 now approved players have, so that we are enabled in all meanings of the term enabled to do those types of clinical trials, at least in places where the checkpoints are improved in those particular tumors, in those particular lines of therapy where the companies are hoping to provide additional value with their agents. So that's the first thing. And then certainly, it is becoming, I think, increasingly challenging to navigate the noise within IO. So there are so many biotechs with so many different programs, and even within a given program, say anti-CD47 or et cetera, that the amount of competition in the space is phenomenal, with people clamoring, saying they have perhaps a better in class or best in class, or some are saying last in class.
That's they are unique and proprietary, but it's
So trying to definitively show that to those pharma partners, and we've talked a lot about this on various panels that I've been on or chaired over the past year, and certainly lots of people are talking about in light of the stumble, and I use that gently. Someone at the JP Morgan Biotech Showcase panel I was moderating said, you can be more harsh and just call it outright failure. But in light of the stumble of the IDO agents, I'm gonna keep myself fairly diplomatic and tactful. There has been a kind of a retrenchment again, with a refocusing on single agent monotherapy activity. So certainly the bar for pharma partnerships now has gone back up. I would say that in the early days of the kind of the IO frenzy, there may have been a little bit of a loosening of that, just because there was so much enthusiasm, perhaps over enthusiasm. Now it's more like it was before in terms of the high bars that people want to see. They want to see multiple models. They want to see the hard models that are checkpoint resistant. They want to see, ideally, that you're not just doing some small decrement in tumor growth, but you're flatlining those tumors. that you're actually doing models that are essentially treatment models, right? Not prevention models, because people in biotechs will often give their active at the same time as they're implanting the tumor in their model system. That's really prevention model. You want to grow the tumor out to some reasonable size, then give your active or active plus other agents and actually show you're deflecting that growth curve and improving the survival of the animal. So all these things that kind of had been kind of obvious in the pre-IO world have now kind of come back to the fore as people have perhaps matured more in their vision, and there are many, many more agents to look at. So, you know, at the very least, one's needing to apply a little more of a rigorous screen on the funnel just so you can get the number down to something reasonable that anyone who's on the BD side within a larger entity, you know, has an opportunity to look at, because it's just too much.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. And coming to close to our talk today, our discussion, which is really pleasant, but I know you guys are very busy now with all work and organizing the Cancer Progress.
Well, mostly we have a lot of work on our consulting plate. the meeting is trying to fit doing in the meeting on top of the day job. So
that's true.
That's challenging.
That's true. What would be like the message? Because I'm sure a lot of small, big-size, mid-size companies that are in oncology space and now turning in oncology space will watch our discussion. And what will be your message prior to the conference, inviting them to join Cancer Progress? Like maybe.
Well, I would like. Yeah. I would say it's a good opportunity. You know, you have plenty of opportunities to go to the major meetings and see a lot of the data. But, you know, for anyone who wants to kind of expand their minds and hear a lively, open, frank discussions about many of these topics within oncology drug development, whether in the discovery side, the nature of the therapeutic approaches, the clinical development challenges. We've got a great panel kind of about N of 1 and next generation omics and influence on kind of clinical development that Brian Leland Jones will be chairing. So you know, the science focus, the clinical focus, the commercial focus, the market access focus, all, you know, mixed to varying degrees across different panels or focused on in various panels, you know, is a really a unique opportunity for attendees to kind of get this stimulation, you know, and it's not the type of meeting where you're going to go and get CME certification, right? Because you're not learning specific in-depth detail about ovarian cancer or in-depth detail about something else. You're having these hopefully intellectually stimulating, but the takeaway from those intellectually stimulating conversations are hopefully very practical and tangible ideas about how to better improve thinking about, you know, the growth of your company, the development of your programs, et cetera, whether you're a small biotech or even thinking, you know, strategically at a large biopharma.
Yes, because as a large pharma, you're also looking for such a new way to grow your business. It's always what else can I do to grow my pipeline, right?
Right, and how can I tell my story better, and how can I differentiate, and what's my value proposition, and how can I position myself amidst all the noise in oncology broadly or specifically in immuno-oncology. So hopefully some of those lessons will come through in the conference. I certainly have in the prior years, and I have no doubt they will in the beginning of May. Great.
So we are very happy also to be able to attend the Cancer Progress. And I want to thank you, Jeff, once again for this great discussion today. And for our listeners and audience, I want to remind we're having today a discussion with Executive Vice President, Head of the Oncology Practice at Cello Health Bioconsulting, previously Defined Health, Dr. Jeff Bockman. Dr. Bockman, thank you. And if you will have any questions, please contact us at BioNeex or Cello Health Bioconsulting for future questions. And the link will be below to go to Cancer Progress and rush to register for the conference. So thank you very much. And we will see each other either at Cancer Progress in May, which I want to remind once again, it's the 7 to 8 May in New York City. Or we will meet each other again at the upcoming BioNeex C-level executive interview. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Sambat. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Jet.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.